Welcome to the Faith and Trauma Center podcast, a unique approach to exploring the intersections of religion, trauma, sacred spaces, and mental health.
Each month, we choose a different topic to discuss weekly from different perspectives. The first week, we explore the faith, community, and clergy perspective. The second week, the mental health practitioner perspective. The third week, the perspective of individuals working to heal from religious trauma. And the fourth week, we invite a special guest who has been impacted by our monthly topic to join us.
This format follows the design of the Faith and Trauma Center's 3 pathways for resources and education. We invite you to explore all the additional material that we offer at faithandtraumacenter.org.
Let's jump into this week's conversation.
Everybody, welcome to the Faith and Trauma Center podcast. We are wrapping up the end of this first topic that we've been diving into with this conversation. I don't know, I think this is probably the one that I'm the most looking forward to, purely because I think that this conversation will feel more like that, just joining a conversation with 2 friends, getting to really talk about personal connections to this, a little bit more of the manifestations of what this looks like in lived experience. So if you've been following along, we've been talking about religious trauma, and we've been doing that in some different just some different larger conversations, with that being faith, and the faith and clergy. Oh my gosh, my words. Faith and clergy leaders getting to kind of have that conversation and that framework, getting to have that second conversation around mental health, and now this one, which is just the lived experience. And I think that there's going to be months as we kind of figure this out. Well, this will be talked from more of our experience with other people. This is a topic that we both have a lot of personal experiences with. So I do want to just kind of issue this invitation that maybe you've listened to the other ones on this topic, or you've listened to one of them, and maybe you are a faith leader or clergy member, maybe you're a mental health professional, and maybe you also are someone who has experienced religious trauma. And so I just hope that this specific episode just feels like this invitation to take off the professional hat and just to kind of get to personally engage and to be present, and to honor the experiences that you've had. So to start, you want to just like do a quick check-in and see how we're both doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I feel like we should probably say who we are, since this is the first
Oh, that's
episode
probably
of
good.
this track. You may not know who we are and what this podcast is all about. So, for those of you that don't know me, I am Christy Love. I am an ordained pastor through the Disciples of Christ denomination. I pastor a church in Central Washington State. And it is a progressive church. It is an open and affirming church. It's a justice orientated church. And it's also a trauma informed church that we do a lot of work around religious trauma. That's a big part of my heart that I bring into ministry. It's also a big part of my nerdy wiring, because it is an experience, like Holly said, that I have had. It's one that I knew I wasn't alone in. And so for me, it's also an area of academic research and study and exploration. But for the purposes of this conversation, we're not really going to dive into data and all of that kind of stuff. We do that in our other conversations each month. For this conversation, I'm just excited, Holly, to come into this place and process just really an acknowledgement that religious trauma is a unique form of pain. It is a unique hurt and harm that we carry with us. And so I'm looking forward to diving into that conversation with you today.
Mm-hmm. But how are you?
How am I? Well, I mean, I'm good. I'm excited to, I'm good. There are sirens, so all my dogs are going to bark.
Podcast with the dogs.
Yeah, absolutely. Never dull at my house. That's for sure. Yeah, I'm good. Yesterday was Sunday. And so, I had a interesting day at church and, preached a little bit of a challenging message, a personal message. And so I've kind of taken it a little bit slower today and been a little bit more gentle with myself. Got some manual labor done this morning, moved a bunch of stuff. So that was good. So I'm tired. I'm good. I'm ready to dig in and dive into this conversation with you.
Okay. I'm Holly Madden. I am kind of in like a career crisis limbo space at the moment, but it's working itself out. So I've done a lot of work in the nonprofit world with you, a lot of work with families in the foster care system. I am now in grad school to become a mental health counselor. That's a huge part of my heart, to focus kind of on trauma, specifically wanting to focus on religious trauma. Um, I am in a season where while I'm in school, I took a job working at a preschool, working with children who are autistic or have developmental delays. And it's become quite the most like, I don't know, it's just been a really beautiful season of getting to know those sweet kiddos and just like see the magic. The way they see the world is just magical, and getting to just learn how to be a better advocate and just a better support. So that's been really, really sweet. I'm good. I'm feeling really tired today because it's back to school week. And so my husband and I, who both work in education, have started back already. And we've just been in like go, go, go mode, gearing up for that. I'm in the middle of finishing two classes at once, which has been a huge like undertaking and a lot of stress. And then tomorrow, my oldest starts second grade and my baby starts kindergarten. So there's some emotions in my household around that, mostly excited, but some anxieties, and I'm in my feels. So that's kind of where I'm at. So I'm recording this podcast while there's like a thunderstorm moving out outside, which is just like I it just it gets me. I feel seen by the thunderstorm right now and the depth of the emotion. So that being said, why don't you start? Maybe do you want to share a little bit about
Yeah.
how religious trauma has impacted you in a personal way or
Yeah. Um, so my personal experience and my driving passion for a lot of the work that I do day in, day out around religious trauma comes from a series of experiences that I've had in the church. One, I grew up in a very conservative Southern Baptist framework. And if you are familiar with the Southern Baptist Church at all, it is one that is heavily, heavily male centric. And so women aren't allowed to preach. Um, there's definitely not any acceptance of our queer community, and it was an interesting upbringing. I grew up a church kid, definitely kind of that quintessential church kid. I was in church all the time. I was in youth group all the time. Um, I went through youth group in the 90s. And so I got to navigate youth group through the lens of teen mania and the purity movement and purity culture and all of the fun things that came.
all the fun stuff?
I grew up with a lot of toxic narratives. I grew up thinking as a female, there were a lot of things I could and couldn't do. I grew up thinking that mistakes I had made defined who I was. And I grew up thinking they were mistakes and not just like learning experiences, because again, part of that narrative. So fast forward for me, I married really young. Um, Part of that religious trauma piece, part of that toxic response piece. Had three babies again because that's what we do in good churchy households. And I love my kiddos very, very much. They're all in their 20s now, which is crazy. But it was a challenging few years for sure, in a lot of ways. And eventually my first marriage fell apart for a plethora of reasons, and the church didn't know what to do with that. And it fell apart and it was very messy, and the church really didn't know what to do with messy. And so one of the more challenging things that I experienced was kind of at this time of my life when the bottom really fell out. I experienced a faith community that felt like, ooh, maybe you would be better off somewhere else. And I can remember the pastor sending my mom a letter. And because I had moved back home to be close to family while I was navigating getting used to being a single mom with three kids under the age of 4. And Anyway, he sent my mom a letter and said, I think Christy might be more comfortable somewhere else.
Mm.
And you will learn this about me as we get to know each other through this podcast. I don't go quietly into the night. And so instead, I, sit on the front row for a year and just kind of this idea that you can't run people off because they're hard or they're messy or they're complicated.
Mhm.
There's a lot of hurt in that season. There was a lot of isolation and loneliness and people that pulled back and kind of treated you like you had the plague because apparently divorce is contagious. And so, there were a lot of those pieces for me. Fast forward a couple of years, I was healing. I was making my way through the world. My paths crossed with a pretty cute guy, and we've now been married for a long time.
How
We
many years?
Oh my gosh, I knew you were going to ask me that. We lose count every anniversary.
Every
Holly knows
year.
this. Every year, my husband and I are like, hey, we should renew our vows on our 10th anniversary. And then we wake up the next morning and Facebook is like, happy 10th anniversary. And I'm like, dang it. I think that it's 18. I'm pretty sure. I'm sure. He'll listen to this and he'll be like, Christy,
He'll
you were,
correct you.
and I'll
Yeah.
let you know if I was wrong, but I'm almost positive that it's 18. Um, so anyway, we've been married now for a long time. But as we blended families, that's messy. Church didn't know how to handle that. So we did finally decide it was time to move on and find a different church where we could kind of start over as a family unit. And long story short, I was really feeling called to ministry. And in my own narrative, didn't think that I could do that because I'm a girl. Didn't think I could preach, didn't think I could do a lot of things. So I started a women's ministry because that I knew I could do. And which is how you and I met,
Yes.
which I'm forever grateful for. Um, but I had an experience at that church where I did feel called to pastor. I actually felt called to church plant. And I remember vocalizing that in a meeting once and being told that I had all the right gifts and all the wrong genetics. And after quite a bit of soul searching and a lot of like theology digging, I started to recognize, yeah, that's not what that says. And so yeah, I could go on, but for me, these were a lot of those really formative religious trauma pieces that really kind of shaped for me this thing. I always tell people I could be the poster child for the one that walks away from the church and feels justified in doing so. But I haven't, and I don't because I believe in the design of the church. And I know that there's a lot of you that are probably listening to this that are like, hell no, like not gonna happen, not going back, not safe. And I hear you 100%. But I think for me, I have stayed because I want to try to make it a safer place for
Mm.
what I wish I would have had and what I wish all of our listeners would have had that wouldn't have caused so many of the harms to begin with.
Mm. And I love that about you. I respect that about you so much because I do think, and you and I think we've even talked about this on this podcast this month, was how there's so many people who get into pastoral care who for them church was always a good thing, or maybe they found church later in life and they found that calling. And I say church specifically because I think you can have a relationship with God and not with the church, and I think that there's a big difference there, that when you feel that like tug at your heart to become a pastor, and I think that there's something really beautiful about saying like your commitment to religious trauma because of just so many experiences that you've been through, and to do that inside of a church is just really beautiful, and it has always inspired me about you.
Appreciate that. It is sometimes really beautiful and life-giving, and other days it kind of feels like you're banging your head against a stained glass wall, but I will bang my head and I will keep trying to create change as long as I can.
Yeah. I'm curious just what you'd feel led to share when just being so immersed in the church, and just how you yourself navigate triggers around religious trauma experiences. I know I've walked through some of that with you as a friend, but just be curious how you would want to share that.
Yeah, I mean, my my religious trauma triggers, I think, are interesting, and they've evolved, right? As they all do.
Mhm.
So there's some things now that I feel like I can definitely navigate and regulate through better than I could have in the past. But I
Mhm.
think for me, like the things that are incredibly triggering for me revolve around language. Um,
Mhm.
and so when I am in spaces where God is portrayed as only male or as very judgmental or vengeful, that certain populations are, you know, under eternal judgment for X, Y, and Z reasons. Those kind of languages and teachings, and really the weaponization of scripture, is probably what gets me more than anything. And that will get me riled up faster than anything. And so for me, when I get triggered in that space, I have to, number one, recognize what it is. And then I have to choose, like, is this mine to speak into to this person directly? Or is this mine to speak truth over the top of, right? And I think it's important to note that that's happening not just in pulpits, right? That's happening. There's toxicity and weaponization of scripture coming out of far conservative podcasts. It's coming out of DC and most of our state capitals right now. It's happening on the news. And so a lot of times for me, I process a lot of that by trying to speak truth over weaponry.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Hal? Give me a little bit of your pieces that you carry through the world.
Yes. I think for me, I had this very diverse experience with spirituality growing up that I've become grateful for as I've gotten older. But
Mhm.
I grew up in the church. My parents put me and my sister in private Christian school from the start of preschool, and so my entirety of school, and we went to a very large private Christian school. So I had this very odd experience that I think doesn't fit the public school model, doesn't fit usually a private Christian school model, because I had 100 kids in my graduating class, and so smaller than some or smaller than most public schools, but it was still a pretty social environment. I grew up with a lot of language around um, God being good, the salvation of, like us needing salvation, and then the body being bad, and the world, like the things that are of the world being bad. But I was also raised by my parents with this like deep love and profound appreciation for the wild things, and often like taught how like God was in the flowers and in the birds, and a lot of respect for the wild. And so that was honestly where I experienced God. I experienced God underneath a tree in my backyard that was my favorite tree in the world. And I experienced God looking at the birds. And so there was a lot of conflicting things, and there was some pretty dark seasons of my childhood, and I struggled with mental illness very young. And so there was a lot of questioning and deconstructing, and I didn't know the words for that then, and I didn't feel like I was allowed to do it. But I began that journey very, very young, and trying to measure that while I was growing up. During purity culture, I was kind of at the late 90s, early 2000s, really, when I entered my preteens and my teens, and just experienced so much religious trauma from that place. And I think for me, like if I pinpoint religious trauma, it's that space. It is the relationship that I had with my body because of what the church and my private Christian school and my teachers and my peers told me to believe. And that was just really messy. It led to some pretty, or had a, maybe led to is not the right word there, but it definitely played a really significant role for me in some really awful self-harm tendencies that I had. There was a lot of suicidal ideation that I struggled with. I struggled a lot with my body and different eating disorders, and it was just very messy, and I never felt good enough, and I never felt worthy enough, and that was such a driving force for me. And while I was also trying to constantly pursue love and being loved, and I always felt like because I was so broken and bad, because everyone was always telling me those things, like that I had to earn God's love somehow, and that just shaped so much of who I was, and that was really reinforced, especially in young adulthood, while I was trying to like look for love in the wrong places and ended up experiencing rape and sexual trauma in a very horrific way that I think just turned that, like, it just spiraled me to that place. And so for me, there was so much darkness that came out of that. And as I came out of that season, I met you kind of at the tail end of that season, Christy. And there was a lot of love and healing that you poured into me in that space. And I re engaged with church with you, and then watched a lot of that religious trauma that you navigated through and watched you not give up on church. And that was so much of like, and I think there were seasons I probably came to church to like support you and your family because I knew how much that meant to you. And that did something for me too, of like keeping me grounded to that, to a space. But I think as I even began to do a lot more work with my own mental health and trauma and all of those pieces, realizing how much the religious trauma in me had like caused me to live a very disembodied life. And how much that is still something that I'm learning how to heal from and work through in my 30s, and how that still like rages. And I was laughing about it the other day because it's funny, but it's so not funny either. Like I work at a preschool, like it's not an environment, it's a public preschool. And my boss, who's just a very sweet, very kind person, was just doing announcements before the beginning of school and made an announcement about the dress code. And guys, like the dress code is so casual, and it was just like basically like professional, but you work with kids, so you have to be able to dress comfortably. And it was so simple, and yet the word dress code, such a trigger for me. And like there was like a moment of like panic, and I was like checking what I was wearing, and then the next thing I know, there's like rage in me, and I want to be like, don't you dare tell me how to dress. And it's like, calm down, like this is not that. And like how much even those things still really rage in me. And something that's that simple and that normal in a professional setting has just been really tainted from religious trauma for me. So I'm now in a season of not being in the church actively, a season of a lot of deconstruction and a lot of reconnection with the wild, and a lot of drawing from a lot of spiritual wisdom from like the indigenous populations. And so that's been really beautiful, really healing, and seeing a lot of consistency across different cultures and religions of just like this beautiful spirituality piece, trying to raise kids in a world where they're forming their own beliefs now and wanting to be really intentional to allow them the permission to have those beliefs. And I've been really lucky that my deconstruction, I've been walking that with my husband very similarly. And while we're not always in the same place, we're in a similar pattern of just respecting each other. And so I'm grateful for that because I recognize that's a privilege. Not everybody gets to have that experience. But yeah, parenting and deconstructing and all that is been quite the journey.
I mean, I think it's really important, listeners, for you to get a glimpse of the journeys that we've each been on. Because, Holly, one of the things that you and I have talked about, one of the things that I know we hold as a shared hope for this space and this podcast and the Faith and Trauma Center specifically. And the reason that the Faith and Trauma Center, when we were designing the different pathways that you can navigate that resource through, we really wanted to make sure that we prioritized a pathway for individuals with lived experience. Is I think we understand how hard it is to find resources that make you feel seen, that make you feel validated, that give you tools to reclaim, um, you know, pieces of your spirituality if you choose to, and if you don't, that's okay. Um, Also just places that meet you where you are and try to help you find healing pieces that fit for you, because healing is personal, right? It's not cookie cutter. It doesn't work the same for everybody. It's, not go through these so many steps and you'll be good to go.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I hope what you hear in the beginning of this conversation and as we build upon this is we have been there. We are still there in some places. We still navigate triggers. We still, carry a lot of those things. We still have strong emotions around things. Um, Holly, what would be some things you would want to be able to share with listeners in terms of just this, what your hopes and your hearts are for them, for
Mhm.
their own healing journey, maybe a lesson that you've learned on yours.
Yeah. Um, I mean, this is probably going to sound very expected coming from me and the journey I'm on, but like, it's okay. And like, there, I hope that it feels like this beautiful permission. Like, if it feels good to do so, like, get therapy for what you've gone through. And I don't mean that as like someone who's going into this profession. Like I say this from the heart of someone who says like there is just that trauma can be deep. It can be so deep and it's relationally deep and it's it's body deep. Like it can be so enmeshed in every piece of your life. And that there you deserve to find to have a place to be able to work through that, to find healing through that. And I think that because there has been a lot of like a lot of distance between the mental health world and the church because the church has kind of divided some of that, that's a really beautiful way to kind of reclaim that. And like this is trauma, these are symptoms of anxiety, of depression, of trauma. Like to be able to name those things, I think in some of those contexts can be really freeing, if your trauma really aligns with some of that. I also think that for me, one of the most beautiful lessons I've learned is like relearning to find where God or creator or that spiritual connection, whatever feels really grounding for you exists in. And for me, like just going outside and listening to the birds and putting my feet on the grass has been the most healing thing for me, and really reconnecting with the wonder of this beautiful created world, which is, I know, amidst so much violence and chaos and destruction, but there's also so much good and so much beauty that was created to be there. And so I think that those things can be really good. Movement can be really healing. And again, these are things that I've learned. And I just like hope like giving that it's okay. It's okay to engage in those spaces, and I hope that in those ways that you feel you have the courage to pursue, that you find the ability to reconnect with yourself, to reconnect with those pieces of yourself that you thought were bad or toxic or sinful or whatever language was used.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think for me, some of the things that have been particularly healing and things that I hope for others is that you have the courage to take the steps that you need to take to find the healing that works for you. And sometimes healing means staying for
Mhm.
some people, and I never judge that if that's what people feel like they need to do is stay and try to affect change. I also recognize and affirm that staying is hard and it's exhausting. And if you feel called or you feel like you're supposed to stay in a system, make sure you have a support system. For
Mhm.
me, choosing to stay in a system where there are constant triggers and where it is really difficult, um, I have to have people. I have to have, a network of care and support that I can go to when those days are just particularly challenging and difficult. But if you feel like you need to go or you have gone, I also affirm that and I applaud that because walking away, I think is one of the pieces that is really hard for people who haven't walked it from a religious trauma standpoint to understand, right? I mean, many times you're not just walking away from a toxic church, right? You're walking away from friendships. You're walking away from a support group. In some instances, you're walking away from biological family who choose faith community over relationships with their loved ones. And so I just want to encourage you that wherever you are on this journey right now, um, whatever that needs to look like for you right now, um, that you find the courage, you find the support to take the steps that you need to take. And I
Yeah.
hope that you hear that these wounds that we carry from faith spaces, from churches, from faith-filled households, from private Christian schools, from being homeschooled, from being a marginalized people group of any form or fashion, from our own Christian nationalism culture right now, whatever that entry point of wound has been for you, that wound is significant. And
Mm-hmm.
it is as formative and as harmful, and it can have as many complicated consequences as many of the more traditional traumas that we often hear talked about, right? When we talk about things like sexual assault or domestic violence, or we talk about child abuse or neglect, or things like that, that typically are kind of like, oh, well, we accept that those things are harmful. The work that Holly and I are committed to doing is trying to raise awareness and to make people understand that these wounds equate at the same level, because the harm that they have on people is similar, and we see that. And so I want you to know that those experiences are seen and you're not alone.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, I feel like we've wrapped up the first four of these of this new launch of our podcast. I know I feel really good. I feel excited that we get to do this work together. Heavy that the work exists, that the need for the work exists, but um, there's a lot of hope that there's this movement of healing and of advocacy work. And I don't know, I just, to those listening, like, I'm excited you're on that journey with us. I'm excited to get to join you. So we will be back next month with a brand new topic, and are we announcing that now or later?
I think our topic for next month is going to be prayer.
Okay.
So we're
This
going
is
to talk
new to
about
me.
prayer. We're going to talk about prayer trauma.
Like deconstructing that.
Mhm.
That'll be good. That
Mhm.
will be really good. So, we will start with an episode on geared for faith leaders and for clergy members. Then we'll have an episode that's a little bit more geared towards those that work in the mental health profession. And then we'll have the lived experience conversation, much like this one today, where it's just a lot more relational and conversational, and a little bit pieces of personal elements in there. And then I'm excited because we'll actually get to start bringing in a story piece. And so just invite you to listen along, and reach out if you have any questions or want to share, and be sure that you're connecting to the show notes, or going onto our website, because we have quite a few resources on there. And when you go to our website, make sure that you're clicking on that lived experience track. We've done that really intentionally because we want to make sure that what you're clicking on when you go that path is resources that are really personally supportive, resources that are going to speak directly to that soul wound of religious trauma, while the other pathways for mental health and clergy really focus a little bit more on just resources while you're in those professions. And so want to be really intentional to make sure that that space is not triggering, that there is a lot of just resources for you. So anything else you want to add, Christy?
I think the other thing that I would just add is know that there are things coming in the next few months that we are working on specifically for you with lived experience. One of those is an online support group. And so I lead a in-person support group here in the community that I'm in Central Washington State. But Holly and I are going to be kind of tag teaming on a Zoom support group. And so you can get some information about that support group on our lived experience pathways at faithandtraumacenter.org. It will be starting in September. and we'll be connecting that way for right now. And we've got some plans down the road to hopefully get some support groups developed in person and going on around the country. But for right now, this will be a good opportunity. The way that I lead support groups, the way that we kind of do that is we've actually developed some activity workbooks. And so we just kind of go through one different activity each time that we gather. And those are just, kind of geared for us to work through things and have conversations with each other at a slow pace, but at a pace that allows us to really process some things together. So I invite you to take a peek at those and see if that works with your schedule and that's something that you might want to engage with and be a part of. I also encourage you to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Blue Sky, and we're on Instagram. And so those are great places to also just stay in touch with things that are coming up, trainings that are coming up if they're of interest to you, new podcast episode releases, as well as just resources and different pieces like that too.
So if you are watching us, we've almost hit the time. We've given ourselves a time window. So we are so close this week. That feels good. We did that because we could talk a long time.
And it plays music at us and
It
it tells
does
us
play
you need
music.
to stop talking because people don't want to listen forever and ever.
It's very theatrical music. It feels very endearing. So, all right. Well, we are going to wrap this up. Yeah, engage with us in any of those platforms. And we are so excited to get to engage with you next week. Um, yeah.
All right. We'll see you guys back soon.